Miss, can you? I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Richard?
Yes, yes. I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Okay. No, I'm just trying to work out where we got to last night, or this time. Do you want to start from the start?
Yep. We can go ahead with that. I think we left out where we got that video correction. Some issue was going on, so.
Okay. Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Let me just I'll just bring up my instance. But yeah, so we were talking about violations. So I think you're looking at the Sonar screen now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we were talking about the fact that there's generic violations like lines of code in an SQL file, length of a file, length of a line, things like that, which is a violation. Sort of standard programming practices, or good programming practices. Then there's the sort of if you think Java, the Java/PMD sort of checks. So you've got things like dead code detection, unused variable detection, unused method detection. So it's included those. And then you've got the message broker specific ones. So you've got so look here, for example, checking for infinite loops. Checking the flow, the message flow does not consistently reply to message requests, so that's for that's sort of tracing through the paths of the code. So if we'll just look at this one for a second. So backlog 2 should have replied. So we've got backlog 2. Okay, let's look at this one. For example, yeah, I'll just have to change my screen sharing options. Just make sure you're looking at the right one. Oops. So you should be now looking at my message broker instance. So it's flagged. So we're looking at a particular flow, and it's flagged this flow as a concern. It's flagged this flow of concern does not consistently reply. So it's basically saying, if you follow the path through this code, the valid path returns to the caller. The exception path doesn't return an exception. So if something is waiting here for this whatever the reply to queue here is, so whatever the reply queue just to was sent through to the original queue here in the MQ header, it'll be just waiting forever because this thing will never return. So it's a good way. This way, building flows like this is a surefire way of having very long running transactions and having very long running OQ transactions, which is telling us to be wary of this sort of code because it could cause performance issue. Oops. And then so yeah, equivalent like a while true that never returns. And the compute node's inconsistent. I think this is the last one we got to, so we'll just go through this one and then we'll go into the diagramming component. So this one's saying that logically you've got one out connection, but within the SQL you've got 3 different paths going out. So you've got oops. So you got the out from the return true, and then you've got the out one or the out two propagates, which go nowhere. So this is telling us we be wary of this particular piece of code. So that sort of covers off the message broker specific violations, and as I said, there's a whole bunch of them. There's about 80 or so at the moment, and then we're always adding new ones as people decide on their coding style, or we find different ways of checking common sort of production issues. So that's the violation component. So I don't know if you want to have any questions.
Yeah. So how do you invoke these rules? I was just trying to understand, like.
So basically, to get this up and running, you'd need to install Sonar. So you'd need to install Java, then you'd need to install Sonar. You put the plugin in the essentially take the plugin, and that's an upgraded version. But we'll look at this one here. You essentially take the plugin, download it, and put it into into the extensions directory.
Mm-hmm.
Extensions plugins, and then now for the demonstration purposes of demonstrations, we just run it here through a what's called a Sonar runner, just a batch file. But you can run it through an Ant job, and there's a thing called if you run Hudson or Jenkins, it's actually a Jenkins plugin for Sonar, or a Sonar plugin for Jenkins. It explicitly does this sort of job, and you just set up the properties. So if you look here, there's so if you look here, there's the Sonar properties under make sure I'm not wrong. Yeah, so it's this is property file. This is property here, property file list here. Mm-hmm. And so you just drop the necessary configuration in there, and off it goes. And then to run it, in this case, all you do is there's a run.bat here, which is called Sonar runner with picks up the property file, or as I said, you run it through a Jenkins job and it's part of a continuous integration, a continuous build procedure, and we just produce this every time, say, someone checked in the code. Every time we want to do a production release or a release to a new environment. Now there is an interesting product called Build Breaker, and what you can do and what people have been doing is if you look at these violations. Oops, projects. So you look at this this list here, and this is a contrived example, but basically you draw a line in the sand, or what you can do is you draw a line in the sand for an existing project, and you say, well, I've got a certain number of violations in my code, and I don't want to have any more. So what you can do is set up this thing called Build Breaker on Jenkins that has a threshold. As soon as you breach that threshold, it will actually stop your build from being deployed. So what people are doing is they're saying, okay, well, we've got a certain amount of technical debt, but because we want to get this, we want to improve our code quality, we want to get this technical debt down. This is the minimum standard we're going to accept, and so they set the threshold to be whatever the current number of production issues are, or the current amount of technical debt. So going forward, what they do is they allow developers to check in code and make changes, but the technical debt has to stay the same. And then progressively, as they go through these violations and adjust their code or change their code as required, they just drop that threshold. So you're actually start forcing the number of violations down constantly. But that's a question for you. How do you want to handle your software development? But to run it, you just hit run, and it's reasonably quick, and it just produces just updates it every once in a while. Now, in a real project, over time, you'd actually see indicator markers against the number of files, the metrics, and the violations. So progressively over time, it allows you to have a graph of hotspots. Probably won't be much here, but time machine. But it gives you a progression over time. So you can say how many new violations have I got in the last 30 days? How many new violations have I got in the last? How many new files have I got in the last 30 days? And just gives you a way to track these things over time, just to show where your technical debt's going. So that's violations. And the last bit of the presentation we usually talk about is the diagramming tool, which is a recent piece of functionality, and there's still a lot of things we'd like to do with it. But But as I said, it's continuously under development. When you buy a license, you get your upgrades for the next 12 months included. So there's a bit of rationale behind the diagramming. One is it's extremely useful, we think, to be able to visualize things. So to be able to print out diagrams of what the business processes are and put them up on your whiteboard or put them up on your petition in your office, or take it to the business and be able to draw on it and make, and sort of just write out changes you might want to do, and then in code. As you code, you can regenerate the diagrams and see how the new infrastructure of the new processes look. There's also other things we wanted to do with this Sonar plugin that aren't particularly tailored to Sonar. So some of our violations, like warning developers about bad practices in their SQL, or when they're using not invalid, but when they're potentially not tuning their SQL properly. One of the things we'd like to do, or the next version will have, is it'll be a summary of all the SQL code for the entire project somewhere that DBAs be able to look at it. So at the moment, it's very difficult for DBAs to see what message broker code is doing without going into the code itself. So we want to have a placeholder that when we ran the analysis and went through and pulled apart the code, we could take all the ESQL apart, parse that, work out what SQL is actually being run or being created by message broker, and then display that up for the developers and the DBAs to have a look at. So that's the main rationale. So essentially, when you run the plugin, you basically give it a path to So are you still online?
Sorry?
Are you still online?
I didn't get you right.
You can still hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So essentially, when you set up a project,
my question here is like it's just an it's a plugin which is being used for the message broker. So is it being open source plugin, or it's a license?
It's a yearly license.
It's a yearly license. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So the reason we've gone for a yearly license is it allows us that flexibility to continue to offer enhancements. So if at the end of the year you don't feel that you're getting value, you haven't put a lot of money out there, but we think people will, and we'll think people will keep wanting to use it, and they'll keep wanting to improve it because they're getting value. So essentially, developers and teams put requests in, and we progressively include them in the product, and then they go, oh, I want that feature, so I'm definitely going to go for the next year. And we've got two pricing models. One is just the first year, just as an introductory price, and then the price goes up after that. But mainly it's just introductory price because we want people to give it a try, and if they decide against it, then fair enough. But we also need to weed out the people that have no intention of using it commercially. So hence we put a price tag on it. We got a little one in the background. So the diagramming, you just configure as part of the properties. So each project, if you've got multiple projects and multiple different parts of your code you're analyzing different ways, or different code bases for different products, projects, or customers, you can configure different diagramming for each of them. So if you've got 3 different projects going on, you have 3 different diagrams being generated. So yeah, generate the diagrams is just a matter of setting a property and giving it a run. So we see here, and I've set up a little web server here that just looks at that directory. And this is what the diagramming tool gives you. So it gives you basically a page with some child pages and a diagram. So jump into the diagram, into the page. There's a couple of parts of the page. One is the main overview diagram, which sort of shows the interdependencies between the flows itself. So each square box is a flow with a description of the inputs and the outputs. and then the lines represent the relationships between flows themselves. So now there is a diagramming component within Message Broker itself, but what it does is actually generates a single diagram for a single flow. But we want to look at more of a holistic approach to how developers understand what the whole process is, because some of this can be quite complex. But also we want to extend this to be able to take it to, say, production support people or the business to be able to explain things. Hence it's more related to not a single flow, but how the flows interact. And the methods and the ways of messages and information is passed between them. So for example here, it's saying there's a couple of flows, a couple of different processes that can trigger this particular flow, and it has a couple of downstream dependencies, or 3 downstream dependencies. And in future versions, we'll be allow you to set automatic filtering, so you'll be able to say, well, I actually don't want to see the logging flows because they're pretty much standard. So there'll be maybe a I'm trying to think of the term, but a legend will be able to tick things on and off, and one of them will be the different layers of types of information, so MQ versus HTTP versus SOAP versus files. And one of those would also be to say which ones are the particular logging flows that you may not want to see all the time. Yeah, so if you just have a bit of a poke around, if you run this against your code, it just shows you the dependencies. It does show some interesting things. So, for example, let's find something a bit more interesting. No, sorry, I'll just try and find. Whoops. No. For some reason this thing's okay. Not allowing me to select someone. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So it's showing it's got dependencies on flow on queues, but the queues don't the queues here don't actually relate to flows in the system. Hence, there's no relationship. So that's the first part of the diagram, and the other one I was talking about is a place to put pertinent information. So just ideally for people like, say, new starters, or even people who need to navigate the quite complex structures, we've just sort of indexed and provide information for the whole project. So we have a summary here of all the queues, for example. So you give it a queue name, and gives you the queue and gives you where it's actually used. So for example here, so we want to find out what this queue is used for. We can see that it goes to a particular flow called aggregate. Same with the flow names. This gives you a summary of the flow names. So this gives us a way for us to have a broader understanding of the code, which also means it can help, say, people like technical architects and potentially even, I guess, solution designers start looking at naming standards and those sorts of things. So if you can actually see what all the message flows of the system are and a description of what they're doing, then you can start easily, or more easily, being able to decide on what the standards might be. So you'd be able to determine which ones you think are well named and which ones aren't, and start flagging them with developers to say, well, we don't like the name of a particular flow, or we don't like the name of, for example, here we've got clear the filter. We say here we've got some fairly meaningless and I'll just expand this out to 50. We've got some fairly meaningless queue names in here. So even though the Sonar plugin does tell you try to enforce queue names, this here is another way of seeing what all the queues are that are in the system look like, so you can determine whether or not you want to address the queue namings. It's a summary of the data sources, and so you can see where different parts of the system use different parts of the data. Some of the properties, you can see what stored procedures is being used. Inputs and output files. At the moment, these are just informational here, but next version or the version after that will be building the relationships between flows based on not only the MQ relationship, but also between the file input and file output. So what that means going forward is if you know that somewhere something's producing a file, then you can trace, it's a lot easier to trace through the entire system graphically where what's causing that file to be generated, what's consuming that file if they're a message broker. And Progressor will be adding more and more tabs and also including more oops. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's yeah, okay. So there's a bug in the drawing in the rendering, but yeah, and in future we're also adding more summary details to the flows themselves that are just pertinent or particular to that flow.
And Richard, I have a question, right? So if you look at this diagram, right? So graphically, like when you say graphically, you can understand the flow. So is it that I can visualize, or I can actually see the flow of the actual flow, when you have, say, you have the message going from one flow to another. So is that something can be achievable? Like you have a dashboard, so some kind of a dashboard where I can visualize, like, this is your source and that could be your target. So that way I can see my message going from one end to another.
No, there are tools that definitely do this that level of application monitoring. This tool's more for static code analysis. We are looking to see whether or not we can introduce more runtime or real-time runtime behavior, but there's a couple of things that we're wary of with that. One is you're not likely to be able to plug this tool into production anyway. Mm-hmm. Because people are a bit, usually, and rightly so, because of operational risk. You don't want a third-party tool hooking into your production environment and potentially slowing your production environment down just to generate diagrams. So there are application activity management solutions out there that do manage MQ, but this doesn't do it from that point of view. This more looks at the dependencies as far as the possible paths as well. So. And the other drawback of doing it in the real time is it doesn't give you the developers it gives you the information on what's happening at that particular point in time, which is very valuable, but it doesn't give you an overall understanding of the system itself. So you may have paths in the system that are very rarely used, and a tool based on runtime behavior won't give you that information because it may not be triggered. So this aims to give you all possible paths, even ones that are very rarely used. Well, we have been looking to do some picking up some runtime behavior, so we can match these flows and these diagrams back against, say, execution groups and other information about the broker. For example, we might be able to color code things where we actually know that they actually are deployed and running. So, for example, you might be able to regenerate the diagram at a point in time to say, well, these are the ones that are actually deployed and running, and that gives you an extra level of information. But as I said, that you want to be wary of using that in an environment where you could hit production and potentially cause grief or introduce risk. Going forward, also there's a lot more we do want to do with this diagramming solution. For example, it doesn't handle reply tos, so there's no way of seeing where, if, for example, a particular flow replies somewhere else, there's no relationship back to that at the moment. That's something we're looking in one of the future releases. Also, we don't have publish subscribe behavior in there yet, or topics or topics, I should say. So if a message goes out via a topic and then it's propagated out through the the topic to a queue mechanism in MQ, we don't know that it's actually going to the real destination. So what we would be looking to do is break apart those topics and those queue definitions and build them and display them more flatly here. So you should, in future lists, you'll be able to see that there's a relationship between two flows, and that's based on a topic, and we'll give you back the topic, just so you know why that relationship exists. But that's more features going forward. So that's it. That's basically it. That's what we've been trying to do. Yeah. So yeah, that's what we've been trying to do, and having some success. Definitely with teams that are trying to use it as part of continuous integration. And then often people are just interested in see what sort of things that we think is good practice and bad practice. We do have people coming back to us with wanting to have their own custom rules built into the product, which is not as easy as it is with for example, in the Java world, because the nature of the non-mainstream programming languages doesn't have the same level of support from Sonar itself. So we do incrementally build and release new versions with new rules for particular tailoring for particular situations, which people can just look here. So people can just turn on and off depending on what they want to do. So if I just log in here. So you just, depending on whether or not you think something's important or interesting for you, you can just change the priority here, and then yeah, then it changes it to how it looks in the report. So these the initial severity levels that you get when you install the plugin are all suggestions, and you can tailor it to your environment. Yeah, so that's the presentation. Is there? Yeah. Now, if you want to give it a try, I'm more than happy to send you a trial version, and going forward, we can obviously give it a try in your environment and see if you want to pursue it or not.
Yeah, sure. Definitely, I'd like to try this and see how it goes.
Yep. Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll look to set up the get you a trial version sent out to you. I'll email it to you, just that email address you sent me in LinkedIn, and then maybe give it a go setting up Sonar. And if you have any issues, we can spend another bit of time, a bit more time, just getting up and running on your desktop, and then we'll see how it looks.
Sure.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, I'll do that today or tomorrow, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Okay. Oh, hope you got something out of it, and I'll chat to you a bit later.
Sure. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning.